Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. We have a new cabinet full of new ministers, some familiar faces, some new portfolios, some changed ministries entirely. Premier David Eby outlining his new picks on Monday. We're recording on a Friday, so we've had some time to digest it, and we're going to bring the panel in to look at the good, bad, and ugly of both this, and subscribe to our podcast audio version for some discussion about the Conservative opposition shadow cabinet as well. So, Allie Blades, Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver here. You know them each and every week. The Pod Squad going to help us understand BC's new cabinet. Let's just start with essentially kind of maybe an overview here of the new cabinet. We have the same size, 27 ministers, 4 of which are ministers of state, supported by 14 parliamentary secretaries. So that is the broad outline of the cabinet, roughly the same size as last time. Why don't we start with you, Allie? What did you think of David Eby's choices here?
Well, in previous shows, we kind of talked about the pickle that he's in because of there's geographic considerations. And so I thought some of his choices, particularly for Minister Osborne for health, that was actually a really great choice. That she doesn't represent the Lower Mainland, and I've said this before, and I will continue to say this: a minister from the Vancouver area, where they would have options for hospitals, and opposed to the current minister, where she does represent a rural area. That there could be some ER closures. That issue, which is key in our province, isn't going away anytime soon. So I thought those geographic considerations were interesting. Tamara Davidson, I thought that she would get something a little bit more higher profile, just given her geographical area up north in the Haida area, but she's Minister of Environment and Parks, and so that was a little disappointing. But for the most part, and we've said it before, that he had a lot of new MLAs to work with here. So it's a balance that I think that they're all going to have to grapple with, in the balance of the experience and the new MLAs taking key ministry portfolios.
Yeah, you're right, Jeff. I think 12 ministers either retired or lost their seats. And that's a big chunk of cabinet. So there's a lot of turnover here, a lot of new faces. Depending on how you view it, a weaker cabinet front bench or a revitalized cabinet front bench. I'm guessing you have an opinion one way or the other on that.
I think it's renewal, right? That's what I think. That's the good.
Shock me.
The good word for it. Look, it's a balance of proven leadership and new energy. You look at the front bench. You've got some really seasoned, tested, and effective people: Mike Farnworth in transportation, Adrian Dixon energy, Ravi Kahlon in housing, Bowen Law and infrastructure, Nikki Sharma, returning Attorney General, and Josie Osborne. I think they're going to bring these bunch new ideas and urgency, along with experience and savvy. Renewal is what keeps governments going strong. And the word that stood out for me in Premier Eby's speech at the swearing-in was delivering. And I think that's an important word, because it's not about new ideas. It's not about figuring out big plans. I think they've decided that they need to slow down, focus on what they've announced already, and actually start putting that into practice, taking the announced things and getting them done. And I think that will be a shift in tone of the government going forward.
I do agree with you on that. I think there is a strategy from the NDP now to slow down, which is hard for David Eby, who came in guns a-blazing.
Action man.
It reminds me, I think I used this analogy once, but probably not on the show. It was like watching the Eby government is like watching someone run in on for a polar bear swim, on the day after New Year's. They just like build up a head of steam and they go for it, and then they hit the water. And as they hit the water, they start going slower and slower until they can't go faster anymore, and then they fall down. And that's kind of, the government is now, up to here, and David Eby can't move as fast. The phrase he used in the cabinet shuffle and in the media availability afterward was bringing British Columbians along with him, which he sort of has explained means, better explaining his decisions. And I think when you look at some of the portfolios like Christine Boyle in Indigenous relations, you're thinking that's a massive file. That's a brand new person who's very close to David Eby. We're probably not going to see major changes there right away. Like that is not, that might slow down and recalibrate and then carry on a little bit later in the mandate, an area where you could argue some of the changes haven't brought people along. I don't know. That was my take. Jillian, you watched this. What did you think of all the cabinet?
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing that really jumped out to me is how the front bench is really focused on that implementation, and specifically implementation of building stuff. So we actually have a new ministry of infrastructure that's headed by Bowen Ma that's going to be responsible for building hospitals and schools and that sort of a thing. And we also have Mike Farnworth moving into transportation and transit. And I think that, looking at a lot of the problems and the frustration coming out of the election is that failure to sort of get projects from the announcements phase into the implementation phase. We've really struggled with delays on projects, overruns, things, being promised and just not happening, and nothing makes people more frustrated than that. And I think, Eby really focused as well in his first 2 years as premier on housing. And we quickly saw from local governments the biggest barrier to actually implementing those new housing policies that are designed to build so much more supply is infrastructure. So it really is, I think the infrastructure deficit is a huge underlying problem that's preventing us from getting traction on expanding capacity on everything from schools to hospitals and healthcare to housing. So I think it was really interesting to see how many people that are sort of the top ministers are going to be focused on that. And it's going to be really interesting to see if it actually works.
It does fit into what Jeff's been saying for a while now about get stuff done, get it done, just get it done. And if you create a ministry of getting it done, which is essentially what Bowen Ma's infrastructure ministry is, and you take the big infrastructure projects from the other ministries. And Eby talked about things like coming up with sort of standardized school designs so that you can plop those down really quickly without having to redesign a new school for a neighborhood. Like, it makes sense, you can see what he's trying to do with it. 7 years into this government, 2 years into his premiership. So you could also say, the hell have you been doing? but it does make you can see where he's going with it, right? Yeah. Like, you can understand it.
And Rob, you said you were talking about, bringing people along. I don't think that's about communication. I think you think of that old school exercise of show and tell. I think the government has done a lot of telling. They've done a lot of talking. They've done a lot of communicating. They got to lean more into that show part, right? And I think that's what bringing people along has got to be about. It's about showing them that the things that they've told them about are actually happening and going to make a difference for them.
Let's stay with you, Jeff, because we're going to go around here and just sort of pick ministries to describe a little bit more, to tease out either the minister or the portfolio. What's one you want to highlight here and talk a bit more about?
Well, I want folks who know my background in government will not be surprised when I talk about health. I worked there and saw the big challenges there. You have Josie Osborne replacing Adrian Dix. Adrian Dix there for 7 years. Premier Eby, acknowledging the work that Adrian did in COVID and recruiting doctors and nurses and getting the hospitals built and underway. Decided he needed to put a new face there to reflect that the government is going to take a new approach on, again, the delivering the big issues. She's got a big challenge, right? She's got a huge agenda, Minister Osborne does. Ending ER closures, making it easier for people to get the medical care they need, continuing to grow the number of doctors and nurses in BC, because we've got more, but still not enough. And oh, by the way, now new to the ministry, addressing the opioid overdose crisis. and she's got good people around her, and she has a real strong track record of doing well. Getting to when she was in Energy and Mines, getting a deal done with industry on critical minerals was very complicated, and she got it done and brought stakeholders along with her. There's a $36 billion hydro building plan that she got done. So she's very capable. One thing that strikes me about her walking into health is that they're missing a deputy minister. And so for folks who may not know, deputy minister, that's the person in charge of the public service in that ministry. So it's the chief implementation officer. And the government, despite knowing for a very long time that the former health deputy minister, Stephen Brown, was retiring, posted the job externally just a few days before the cabinet swearing in. So that's some suboptimal HRing there, folks. If I were her, I'd expedite that hiring. And I'd take some quick action to establish who's the boss, not Tony Danza, but Josie Osborne. One idea, direct the public service to conduct a 90-day review of health authorities and go after the big empires and administrator salaries, establish that she's going to get things done. But it's a big challenge, and we'll see if Minister Osborne can get her done.
Yeah, it's huge. It's
half
even
the
bigger,
budget of government, yeah.
Even bigger than it was before the cabinet shuffle. Somehow the ministry grew larger. Allie, what do you think? What's your pick for something to talk about here?
I'll move into finance, but I do want to point out that with this change up of cabinet titles, there was the removal of a focus on addictions. And there have been some criticisms this week of just how much it was a failure before, and how, the NDP had created this file with a focus, but not necessarily a budget or any mandate to, or the ability rather to make some of those changes. Those were all still technically under health. And so it was very performative in a way. And so it's gone now, which great for David Eby, in that, like, we're learning to be a better leader here. So now this is fully encompassed back within health.
Let's talk about that. Let's go around and just talk about that, and we'll come back to you, Allie, on finance. But I was going back and I was reading the 2017 John Horgan cabinet where they created the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions last night, and he was talking about, I don't want this file handled off the side of someone's desk. I want someone on it every day, talking about it, pushing it forward. And you could see the idea behind it, but you're right, like, it didn't have the ability to make policy within the healthcare system where you have to put the beds, and it didn't have the budget to create them. And so it became sort of beholden to the health minister. And it never really felt like it got off the ground, it's an interesting exercise though, right? In terms of, like, does a ministry and a minister put an emphasis on something even without the ability to do anything? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that, but it's notable that the Ministry of Air, as I called it at one point, has disappeared with a whiff.
Just real quick. I think structurally, if you don't give the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction a budget and power, it is structurally the side of the desk of the Ministry of Health. So you can say that you don't want it handled off the side of the desk, but structurally, that's exactly how they set it up to do. And bring it back into health, to me, seems like a good approach, provided that it gets the focus and attention in that ministry that it absolutely needs.
Yeah. Jillian, did you have anything on that?
I agree. I think that, the intent was honorable there. It was a very different political climate in 2017. I think a feeling when the BC Liberals left office that they had been really slow to act, and I think that was actually a commitment from the Green NDP CASA deal that they had both had in their platform. So it wasn't just the NDP that thought that was a good idea at the time. There was a feeling that there was a real need to really put it in the spotlight and really focus on it. But I agree. I think that it wasn't ever given the resources it needed to be successful. And that's a shame. I think the flip side of that is, we've moved forward, I think, into recognizing that this really is a health issue, and mental health is the same as any other health care issue, and I'm hopeful that this can, be treated as such now that it's back in that file. The other thing I would say is that, it's an interesting case study to think about when we're looking at all of these other ministers of state and parliamentary secretaries that Eby's appointed. Are they going to have the resources to deal with things like rural development and rural issues, because we've got a couple of those appointed, or are they kind of more just performative, like Allie said?
It's the only other thing that I think about with the mental health and addictions ministry is the decriminalization experiment, and the continued sort of safe supply. So it's possible that maybe one of the reasons those weren't quite as successful is the sort of fragmented ability to respond and deal with that as it went along. We're all talking to Minister Jennifer Whiteside, but the health policy is held by another minister, and the police response to it, which ended up being one of the big problems, is held by another minister, and it didn't seem like it had a kind of one-stop shop. But I don't know. David Eby wouldn't admit that when he was asked. He continues to sort of execute the art of the pivot, as we talk about, without kind of admitting any failure along the way. Not that it was his; it was Horgan's creation. But if you're going to change something, just say it didn't work, and this is why it's going to work now. But that is not how this administration does things. Allie, we want to go back to you on finance.
I mean, all of the things that we're talking about building hospitals, ensuring that we're addressing all of these issues that we have in the province. Well, guess whose job that is now? It's Brenda Bailey. And so we've chosen a cabinet minister with some experience. So this isn't a brand new MLA. And then she's been solid to say that it's going to be her number one priority to reduce the deficit. But at close to $9 billion, that's quite the challenge. And then the other thing that she needs to do, in my opinion, is speed up economic growth. And so that is a newbie MLA and Minister Gibson with Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation. And so I think those two will likely see working close together just because of that economic development that we need. The BC Business Council actually put out a report this week that was a bit of a warning sign too, that if we don't focus on our economy, that we're going to be reduced even further into a very bleak economic state in comparison to other provinces that are thriving. I've said this over and over before. If we want to create those treatment beds, it requires a provincial budget that can pay for those things. That's why Alberta is able to do this so quickly, is because their economy is in a better shape than ours. And then just to tie it into another ministry, because it is important to focus on the fact that finances is everything. Perhaps there's a potential with BC mining and exploration sector. It has 60 critical mineral projects waiting for permits. Just putting that out there. And so, maybe this will be the time that we'll say yes to business through Brenda Bailey's leadership. So I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm. There's a new Ministry of Mining and Critical Resources with Minister Jagrup Brar. So you're right, that may, and the Premier and John Rustad, the Conservative leader, both talked about mining and the potential for critical resource mining to supercharge the economy and add to the GDP, bring the deficit down. So that's
critical minerals. And folks who've been listening to this podcast know I talk about critical minerals probably way too much, but I will tell you just real briefly, Jagrup Brar has been really impressive out the gate in mines. The day after the cabinet swearing in, he had talked to all of the major mining companies in British Columbia. He's conveyed a real understanding of the file just a few days in. He's taken this seriously. The government's taking it seriously. And as Allie points out, we need to focus on growing the economy so we can pay for the important services that folks are depending on us for, and to provide some relief on cost of living to folks where we can.
Yeah, the minerals being used for things like solar panels, batteries, the sort of clean green technology requires some of these
transmission wires, for electricity. Yeah.
It's also, $38 billion in economic opportunities, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's much more, mining has suddenly become much more palatable to the New Democrats than natural gas or hydro dams or anything like that. So it's interesting to watch that happen. Jillian, what would you like to highlight?
Yeah, I was going to talk about energy, which actually is where the Ministry of Mines came from. It used to be part of the Energy Ministry, and now it's split out on its own, which kind of reminds me and makes me think, is it kind of the new forestry for BC? That certainly seems to be the direction that we're going. And it's going to be interesting to see. Mining hasn't been as much on the forefront of the environmental kind of advocacy in BC. So it'll be interesting to see if it kind of maintains that status, or as we get more projects built, if it becomes more controversial. So Adrian Dix went into energy. It was, I think a lot of people were expecting that. He used to be energy critic in opposition. And I think this kind of fits with what I was talking about at the beginning of the show about just the need to build things and putting that front bench in those ministries where things really need to get built. Energy in BC is in a really interesting kind of turning point where the Site C Dam is coming online, and BC Hydro has just put out a call for power. They got about 3 times more projects than they were looking for. And I think that that's going to be another big source of economic development that the government's been looking at. These are projects that are, most of them are wind. There's also some solar and biomass and hydro projects that are being proposed, and they're really spread throughout the province, especially in the interior and the north, where the government said they really heard from voters that they need to do better on that economic development front. It's going to be really interesting to see where Dix moves on this file. I think on the one hand, he's been more of a kind of pro fossil fuel, pro traditional industry MLA in the past, but that's obviously not as much the direction that the Eby government has been signaling that they want to go. It'll be interesting to see if he's there to sort of bridge that gap and keep building more LNG and fossil fuel projects, or if he's going to be really there to get those more true, clean, renewable projects across the finish line. But I think, regardless, it's clear with him being there that this is a really important ministry for the government, and we can expect a lot of news and projects coming out of it, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Subscribe to our audio podcast for more content, including the Conservative Shadow Cabinet this week. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.